The Rentier State: why asset owners win and workers lose. The skyline of Manhattan glows with a quiet, indifferent brilliance, a testament to a trillion-dollar architecture that most who walk its streets will never own. We begin with a paradox that defines our era: the divergence between the value of what we do and the value of what we possess. For decades, the American dream was anchored in the dignity of labor, the idea that a rising tide of productivity would lift all boats. But look closer at the data, and a chilling silhouette emerges. While the GDP grows and corporate profits break records, the share of wealth flowing to those who provide labor is shrinking, replaced by a relentless flow toward those who simply own. This is the birth of the modern rentier state. It is an economic landscape where wealth is no longer primarily created through innovation or industry, but harvested through the ownership of scarce assets, land, intellectual property, and financial capital. As the sun sets over the financial district, the silence hides a systemic shift. The engine of social mobility has stalled, replaced by a mechanism that extracts value from the many to enrich the few. We are witnessing a fundamental transformation of the social contract, where the worker is no longer the hero of the story, but a variable to be minimized in the pursuit of yield. The gap is widening, not by accident, but by design, as the very nature of what it means to be wealthy shifts from the sweat of the brow to the collection of rent. The cracks in the foundation are no longer invisible. In the supermarkets of Buenos Aires and the suburbs of Athens, the signs of crisis manifest as a hollowed-out middle class and a desperate scramble for liquidity. When a nation pivots toward a rentier model, the first casualty is the purchasing power of the average citizen. We see this in the skyrocketing cost of housing relative to stagnant wages, a phenomenon where the roof over one's head becomes a speculative asset for a global investor class rather than a basic human need. Economic indicators tell a grim story. As interest rates fluctuate, the debt-to-income ratio for workers climbs to unsustainable heights. In Turkey, the rapid devaluation of the currency serves as a warning of what happens when a country loses its productive edge and relies on volatile capital flows. The sign of crisis is not always a sudden crash. Often it is a slow, grinding exhaustion. It is the realization that despite working longer hours, the goalposts of financial security are being moved further away by the invisible hand of asset inflation. Credit default swaps CDS on sovereign debt begin to flicker red, signaling that the markets sense the underlying fragility. This is the stage where the economy stops serving the people and starts serving the balance sheets of the creditors, leaving the laborer to navigate a landscape of rising costs and diminishing returns, where the simple act of survival becomes an expensive endeavor. The mechanics of an economic shock in a rentier system are often driven by the sudden evaporation of liquidity. When the Federal Reserve adjusts interest rates, it isn't just a number on a screen. It is a seismic shift that recalibrates the value of every asset on Earth. In a world dominated by rent-seeking, shocks are amplified by leverage. Because asset owners often borrow against their holdings to acquire more, a slight dip in valuations can trigger a margin call of historic proportions. We see this play out in the volatility of exchange rates, where a sudden stop in capital inflows can paralyze a nation's ability to function. The mechanisms are complex, but the result is simple. When the music stops, the holders of hard assets, prime real estate, patents, and high-yield debt occupy a protected fortress, while the worker is left exposed. This is the ratchet effect, where during booms, asset prices soar far beyond wage growth, but during busts, it is the public treasury and the labor force that bear the cost of the bailout. The shock is the moment of truth, where the fiction of infinite growth meets the reality of debt. As central banks pump liquidity into the system to prevent a total collapse, they often inadvertently widen the gap as that new money flows directly into the hands of those who already own the infrastructure of the economy, further insulating the rentier class from the consequences of the very risks they helped create. History provides a roadmap of this trajectory through global case studies. Consider the 1997 IMF crisis in Southeast Asia, where hot money fled overnight, leaving local workers to pay for the sins of speculative property developers. In Argentina, we see a recurring cycle of sovereign default and hyperinflation, a direct result of an economy that favors the elite export landowner over a stable domestic industrial base. Greece serves as a modern cautionary tale of the debt trap, where an entire nation's productivity was diverted to pay interest to foreign bondholders, resulting in a decade-long depression and the fire sale of public infrastructure. These are not isolated incidents. They are the logical conclusion of the rentier model. Even in Venezuela, the reliance on a single rent-generating resource, oil, created a fragile state that collapsed when the price of that rent plummeted. In contrast, countries that tax unearned land value or strictly regulate the financialization of housing tend to see more equitable growth. The global comparison reveals a consistent pattern. When the rent collected from the economy exceeds the value added by labor and innovation, the social fabric begins to tear. These nations become warnings to the United States, illustrating that without a correction, the transition from a productive democracy to a neo-feudal collection of asset silos is not just possible, it is already underway. Within the United States, the impact is felt as the Great Divergence. For the first time in American history, the youngest generations are projected to be poorer than their parents, largely because the cost of entry into the asset-owning class has been gated by historic valuations. The U.S. economy has become increasingly financialized. The sector that moves money now carries more weight than the sector that makes things. This shift is visible in the housing market, where institutional investors and private equity firms outbid families for single-family homes, turning potential homeowners into permanent renters. This is the rentier state in its purest form, extracting a monthly tribute from the working class to pad the portfolios of the wealthy. The impact on the individual is profound, leading to debt peonage, where one must borrow just to participate in society. Education, healthcare, and housing, once viewed as pathways to stability, have been transformed into rent-extracting vehicles. As the wealth of the top 0.1% rivals that of the Gilded Age, the velocity of money slows down because the wealthy tend to hoard capital in unproductive assets rather than spending it in the local economy. The American worker finds themselves in a pincer movement. Their wages are suppressed by global competition, while their cost of living is driven up by the very people who profit from their inability to own a piece of the country they build. The responses from governments and central banks have often acted as a double-edged sword. In the face of systemic collapse, the primary tool has been quantitative easing, a process that injects massive amounts of liquidity into the financial system. While this prevents a total depression, it acts as a massive subsidy for asset owners. By lowering interest rates to near zero, the government makes it cheap for the wealthy to borrow and buy more assets, driving prices even higher and further out of reach for the common worker. This monetary regime creates an environment where it is more profitable to play the markets than to start a business or hire employees. When inflation finally arrives, the response is to raise rates, which disproportionately hurts the debtor, the student with a loan, or the family with a credit card balance, while the rentier class simply adjusts their leases and interest-bearing accounts upward. We see a reluctance to implement progressive land value taxes, or to close the carried interest loophole, which allows hedge fund managers to pay lower tax rates than their secretaries. The policy choices of the last 40 years have consistently prioritized market stability over labor vitality, essentially using the public balance sheet to underwrite the risks of the private asset owner, ensuring that while the gains are privatized, the losses remain socialized. Navigating this landscape requires a shift in personal survival strategy. In a rentier state, the traditional advice of work hard and save money is often insufficient because currency debasement outpaces the interest on a savings account. For the individual, survival means moving as quickly as possible from the role of the rent payer to the asset owner, even if on a micro scale. This involves diversifying away from a single source of labor income and seeking passive or residual income streams that can hedge against inflation. Financial literacy becomes a weapon. Understanding how to use low-interest debt to acquire productive assets is the only way many can keep their heads above water. However, the insight for the viewer is more systemic. Recognize that the current economy rewards position over performance. One must look for sectors where the rent is being collected, technology platforms, renewable energy credits, or specialized real estate, and find ways to participate in that ownership. It also requires a mental shift to protect one's most valuable asset, time. In an economy designed to extract, guarding your time and reducing your rent footprint, the amount of your income that goes to interest, leases, and subscriptions is the first step toward true autonomy. The goal is no longer just to earn a high wage, but to build a fortress of ownership that can withstand the inevitable cycles of the rentier-driven volatility. The trajectory of the rentier state is not an act of nature, but a series of political and economic choices. As we have seen from the hyper-inflated streets of Caracas to the boardrooms of Wall Street, an economy that fails to reward labor eventually loses its legitimacy. The historical record is clear. When the gap between the owners and the workers becomes too vast, the system either reforms or it breaks. We stand at a crossroads where the United States can choose to reindustrialize and reprioritize the worker, or continue down the path of a landlord-debtor society. The useful insight for every citizen is that wealth is no longer about what you earn, but what you keep and what you own. To ignore the rise of the rentier state is to resign oneself to a life of perpetual extraction. True economic health requires a balance, where innovation and labor are the primary drivers of prosperity, not the mere possession of a deed or a debt instrument. As we look toward the future, the question remains, will we build an economy that creates new value for all, or will we remain trapped in a system that simply redistributes existing wealth to the few? The answer will determine the fate of the American experiment and the survival of the middle class. The human cost of this economic transition is often measured in deaths of despair and the erosion of community. When an economy shifts from production to extraction, the social glue that binds people together, the sense of shared contribution, begins to dissolve. In the Rust Belt and rural heartlands, the exit of industry was followed by the entry of vulture capital, which bought up distressed assets, not to revitalize them, but to strip them of value. This is the psychological weight of the rentier state. The feeling that you are a stranger in your own town, paying rent to a landlord who lives 3,000 miles away and has never seen your face. The exchange rate of human dignity for capital efficiency has left a void. We see the impact in the delay of marriage, the decline in birth rates, and the rise of the gig economy, where the worker takes on all the risk of the business while the platform owner takes the majority of the profit. This is the ultimate rent, the toll taken for the right to work. Understanding this mechanism is the first step toward demanding a different structure, one that taxes the unearned increment of land and monopolies and returns it to the people who create the actual utility in society. Without this shift, the very concept of the citizen is replaced by the consumer, and the consumer is eventually replaced by the debtor. We conclude with a remarkable message of necessity and hope. The rentier state is not an inevitable destination, but a temporary imbalance. Throughout history, whenever the weight of the rent-seeking class became too heavy for the productive economy to bear, a period of great leveling occurred. Whether through peaceful reform, as seen in the progressive era, or through the harsh corrections of the mid-20th century, the system eventually demands a return to productivity. The lesson for the viewer is that your economic value is not defined by the rent you pay, but by the agency you reclaim. We are entering an era where the transparency of these mechanisms, the awareness of how interest rates, land values, and liquidity affect our lives is our greatest defense. By demanding policies that favor the maker over the taker, and by aligning our personal lives with the reality of asset ownership, we can begin to tilt the scales back. The city of the future does not have to be a fortress of exclusion. It can be a hub of creation. The winner in the new economy will not be the one who owns the most, but the society that ensures everyone has a stake in what is owned. As the credits roll, remember, the economy is a human invention. If the rules no longer serve the people who do the work, then the rules must be rewritten to ensure that the winners are those who contribute, not just those who collect.